Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome once again to Sperry Observatory. For Amateur Astronomers Incorporated makes its home here at the observatory. We're open every Friday night from 7:30 to 10:30. We operate 2 telescopes here on Friday nights, weather permitting, but we always give a presentation at 8:30 p.m. Tonight's presenter is Second Lieutenant Veronica Vergar. I want to give you some information. She's, of course, a member of AAI, but this is going to be a really interesting talk. I'm very excited about this. Veronica did her undergraduate and graduate work at Rutgers University. She has a bachelor's degree in electrical and computer engineering, also known as ECE. She also has a master's in ECE, specializing in machine learning. She has a graduate certificate in cybersecurity. After 5 years of Air Force ROTC at Rutgers, she was selected for the Space Force in the fall of 2023. She was appointed a second lieutenant in May of this year, and she's awaiting orders for her training in Colorado Springs. So with that, I'd like to turn this over to Veronica.
Turn the lights real quick. Okay, quick audio test. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, fantastic. Oh wow, this is weird. I can't see you, but we'll make it work. Thank you, Mary, for the introduction. And also just thank you for allowing me to share about the Space Force today. I know it's a very hot, exciting topic, a lot of questions I got even before, standing up here right now. So definitely excited to hopefully answer as many of those questions as possible. And at the end, whatever other questions you guys have, answer them to the best of my ability. I do have some little goodies to give out at the end if you answer a question or two, so don't be shy. They have the Space Force logo on it, so if you're a Star Trek fan, then maybe it appeals to you a little more. All right, so let's answer the question of what the Space Force is. I do need to give a quick disclaimer, so bear with me real quick here, but this presentation is not officially endorsed by the DoD, by the Space Force, by any government agency or office. This is my personal research and a personal presentation to all of you. So the content that I present, no, it's not top secret. No, you're not getting super insider information. Okay, this is stuff that you can Google. It's online. So if anything, hopefully it kind of points you in the right direction for certain curiosities you might have, right? Of course, this is intended for educational purposes, and my opinions are my own. They're not representative of the U.S. government or anything bigger than that. It's just me, little me, okay? So any judgments you make are of your own as well, based on the information that I present to you. And if you want to have access to, the information or the slides I present, please come talk to me versus just taking a picture and putting it on your own, PowerPoint slides or something else. All right, sound good? Yep. Let's keep going. All right. The wonder of space, right? My family is a big fan of Star Trek and Star Wars. Raise your hand if you're a fan of those, or maybe Battlestar Galactica. Yeah, I know. I mean, you're here, right? So probably. We're all fans of the wonders of space and all of the different, pop culture that's come about of it, right? And it's inspired so many of us to actually be involved in that. And now we have the Space Force to be involved in. So there's a lot of different kind of depictions of what that might be, from the satire of the Netflix show Space Force, right? With that whole, depiction of what it would be is not that far from reality in some ways. It's the government. There's bureaucracy to be had. But there's also TV shows like For All Mankind. Has anyone seen it, just out of curiosity? Okay, maybe one here. It's on Apple TV. It's really good. It goes pretty in depth. I recommend it. And then there's Halo, much more fantasy-like. Point being, this is the inspiration for so much of what we want to see out of exploration in space, right? But we have NASA for that. So then why do we have the Space Force, right? That's the big question. Okay. Well, let's backtrack for a second. And this is one of my first questions here. How do we depend on space? So you'll get a goodie for this if you raise your hand. All right, all the way in the back. How do we depend on space, everyday person? Your phone? Yeah, okay. We'll get one more specific answer than that, maybe. Yeah.
GPS?
GPS, perfect example, right? Raise your hand if you used GPS to get here today. Okay, a couple people that were a little bit lost on the way. Yep, exactly. Also, just in general, cellular communication, banking even, right? Precision timing for your banking transactions. And I mean, the list really goes on, and that accounts for billions and billions of dollars for the U.S. economy, right? And it's just critical to our everyday way of life and our way of, not just our way of life, right? But in turn, national security, right? Yeah. Is critical to national security, not just in peacetime and your everyday uses that many of us take for granted, but unfortunately, you have to consider competition, conflict, and crisis situations, right? Who is going to make sure that you have your space capabilities when things could go wrong? So let's start with just considering that space is very, very congested. 1957, right? Right? We're thinking about the times before Sputnik, right? There's nothing out there, right? Now we got all this man-made junk flying around in space, and it's it's dangerous and it's hazardous to operate in space just because of how much we have up there. But thinking a little bit past that, it's not just congested, but it's contested, right? There's so many countries across the world that want to have their foot in space as well, for good reason, of course. There's so much that space capabilities provide for our everyday life and for enhancing society. The United States and at the time, the Soviet Union, now Russia, that's where it really all started, having our own space programs. Only a few countries in the world have their own indigenous space programs that they can do their own launches and stuff, right? There's a lot of countries that have to rely on each other. And we all have different interests. We all have different priorities. And, we live in the world we live in today. It's not too much I have to say about that, just looking at the news, right? Now, technology-wise, space is no longer free from conflict because technology has reached that level. And you can just see here on the screen just a couple of examples of the countless different ways that satellites are vulnerable. Satellites that provide the capabilities that you use every day are vulnerable to all these different threats. Of course, like I mentioned at the beginning, that includes debris and all the stuff that's already there, but threats that may be intentional. And if you're curious, if you didn't know, well, there must be some rules for what we can do in space, right? There must be something saying that we can't have weapons in space. There's really only one truly internationally agreed upon foundation for this, and it doesn't say too much. It's literally about 2 paragraphs in the Outer Space Treaty of 1967 that says we won't have nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction. But that's really it. I mean, pretty much past that is fair game. It's a gray zone of how we're supposed to operate in space. The 2 main countries to be keeping an eye on are, of course, China and Russia, not just for the reasons of why we, are in contested, environment with them, but also because they have very much more advanced space programs than any other country. They're the ones following up right behind us in terms of trying to reach our level of space capabilities. I leave this last one here. There are many examples. You can Google it. There's so many examples in the news of what China, Russia, and some other nations are doing in space that is concerning and threatening. But this one is definitely scary, right? Because, okay, well, if the only rule we have against conflict in space is to not have nuclear weapons, and intelligence points to Russia as of recently, as of this year, working to develop that, then we got to defend what we have. We have to be ready for the worst case scenario, right? We are here. It's the Space Force's job is to defend the everyday necessities of our American people and your access to space and all the critical systems that revolve around our national security. Okay, so that's just the bottom line, the base foundation to lay for you. And this is just a little reveal of what do you call a Space Force person? A guardian. Yes, kind of like the Guardians of the Galaxy. Okay. I'm a fan of the Guardians of the Galaxy personally, so when I saw this, I was actually kind of happy about it. So this picture is from USA Today. I just wanted to put it up there as a personal testament to the legacy that's being built from all different little towns and every state, building their Space Force legacy as the Space Force is very young. This captain in the middle here, she actually graduated from Rutgers University as well. And she's now one of the people that is mentoring me and giving me a little heads up of what I'm getting myself into. So, you know, it's just really cool to see where it's all starting, and Rutgers is part of that. So the Space Force was created in 2019. This was, you know, just a few months before COVID. So maybe it went over your head when it happened because there's a lot going on in the world, but that's when it was created. So it is 5 years old. And the mission of the Space Force is to secure our nation's interests in, from, and to space. And I'll break down a little bit of what that means in terms of what the Space Force does, you know, on a regular basis, on a daily basis. And its vision statement is Semper Supra, which is Latin for always above. For anyone that's familiar with the military, each of the branches has their own Latin, you know, vision statement, so, or their motto. So that is the Space Force motto. Okay, if it wasn't already obvious, the Space Force is for defense in space, right? So that does make it a branch of the military. Okay, it is its own independent branch of the military. It is part of the Department of the Air Force. So similar to how the Navy and the Marine Corps are part of the Department of the Navy, it's that same model for the Air Force and the Space Force. But it is its own independent branch of the military. And it's just crazy to think that it's been 73 years since we've created a new branch of the military, right? That's just, I mean, that's just incredible to me. So everyone that's entering, including myself, which is part of why I'm so excited about it, we're a part of the foundation of what the Space Force will become. So it's really exciting. 73 years since the Air Force was established, and just a little snippet of history to add in there for you all. The Air Force was created from the Army Air Corps, right? World War II happened, and we were like, whoa, air power can do so much, and it has so much impact. It is pivotal. It is not just a little support, you know, to the Army and the Navy. It's not just, you know, their extra sidekick, right? It's much more than that. After the technology, especially after the technology develops and we saw the consequences. Same thing with the Space Force. The Air Force Space Command has been around since 1982. So space military force is not a new idea, okay? It's been around. But as of the past, you know, basically decade or two, we've really started to see both the technological development and implications in war and in peacetime, of course. So that's just kind of an analogy since the last birthing of a military branch. Okay, so how does the Space Force go about protecting our access in, from, and to space? There's a little picture of me when I was a little kid wearing a NASA outfit. Yeah, I dreamed of being in NASA, but now Space Force, but I'm still, I'd say, just about as happy about it. So the Space Force's priorities in order to accomplish its mission are to protect satellites, to facilitate launches, and then, you know, everything outside of that, or even involving that, really, humanitarian and military operations. But who knows what the future holds? I know one of the big curiosities is, are Space Force personnel, are Guardians astronauts? Right, that's a big question. The astronaut program is under the purview of NASA. But that's my point of who knows what the future holds, honestly. There's a lot that you can imagine about our expansion of humanity into space and technological development and what the needs will be for the future. We can't say for sure right now, but there's so much possibility. So maybe that little girl will get to wear an astronaut suit. We'll see. All right, so humanitarian and military operations. Here's a quick hit list of some of the key ways that the Space Force provides its space capabilities for these different types of operations. Very obviously, GPS. If you didn't know, the GPS system that you rely on every day was actually created through the Air Force. Those satellites were launched up, and that was all part of an Air Force project. And the military uses the same GPS satellite constellation, but they have their own precise GPS, while everyday use is through standard GPS. So now, if you didn't know that, that's a little fun fact. Of course, missile warning, absolutely critical to your peace of mind every single day that you are safe and that the Space Force is watching out. And then there's different types of warfare to keep in mind: space electronic warfare, orbital warfare, cyber warfare. There's just so many ways that need to be defended for satellites given the different vulnerabilities they have. And intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance is really just talking about keeping our eyes and ears open at all times and being able to decipher all the information that we get in from all the different satellites and sensors that we have up there in space that are looking down at Earth and all around at all the other things that are floating up around there in orbit. The Space Force has only a few official Space Force bases, but there's a number of different locations out of which the Space Force operates with other branches of the military, cooperating with them, working with them, because every single branch of the military relies on space capabilities the same way that you do, right? And also the Space Force does have locations in 8 other countries. So it's a small force, it's the smallest military force, but it's spread out because the Space Force is needed across all domains and all environments. It's needed everywhere. So, okay. This was supposed to be a question and I spoiled it, so we're gonna keep going. Yes, the DoD, the Air Force, did develop the GPS satellite constellation. We'll find another opportunity to give something out later. Okay, so we hit on the operations, protecting satellites, right? There's countless objects. I've already kind of gone through that. It's congested up there in space.
Yep.
The GPS system that we have, that GPS constellation, there are 31 active satellites. When you think about it, for the amount of satellites we have up there, that's not all that many. It's almost just as many as we need to be able to triangulate and to provide precise GPS, right, positioning and navigation and all that. So that's just, I mentioned that to emphasize how important it is that those satellites be secure at all times so that we be able to defend them and provide everything that they provide for you every day and for the military and for all the operations that happen. And of course, there's other satellites for other purposes, and they exist in all different orbits. I'm not going to go in this in much depth right now, but I do put it up here in case you're curious and you want to look it up online. But depending on the orbit, obviously, there are different purposes for those satellites. So I just find this very interesting. I think it's worth looking up later. Same applies to this. I'm definitely not going to bore you with this one. But this goes through some of the specific satellites that exist that you're allowed to know about, of course. And yeah, it's just definitely worth going through if you are curious. All right. Okay, now an opportunity for the goodies. How many launches has there been through the Space Force or facilitated by the Space Force? Rough guess, within 10 or 20, give or take. That already narrows it down a little bit for a range, but
30?
30? Okay.
12?
12? Okay, well, let's go with 30 and 12. All right, you get a magnet or a flag, we'll see after.
Whoa.
Right?
Yeah.
Of course,
No idea.
the key word is facilitated, right? These are not rockets that were designed by the Space Force, and I'll go in the next slide and emphasize the fact that we have commercial partners, but the majority of the SpaceX launches that you watch on your YouTube live stream from home when they happen every week or so, they're probably happening out of Cape Canaveral, and Cape Canaveral is a Space Force station now. So all of those launches are being facilitated by the Space Force now. And the majority of them are for national security purposes in some way, shape, or form. They don't have to be military assets in and of themselves. Of course, there are, but majority of them are for some type of national security purpose. And every time you see those launches, there are Space Force Guardians in their mission control in uniform. I know a couple of them that are brand new lieutenants like me, just a couple years ahead of me, of course, that are in those mission control rooms and are doing the work, which is really cool to think. Okay, commercial partners. SpaceX, that's the big one. We all know that. Falcon 9 and the Falcon Heavy. I throw this up here because we recently went to Florida, my parents and I. And if you haven't been to Kennedy Space Center before, or you haven't gone recently, they created a new complex where they have a bunch of all the new stuff that we have, all the new spacecraft. They have the Falcon 9 hanging there, dangling from the ceiling. So I do mention it just in case you haven't been up to date on all the cool stuff that they have there now. It's definitely worth a visit with all they've added. ULA has the Atlas 5 and the Delta 4. That's a model of the Delta 4 on the bottom right. And there's many more companies that want to have part of the space game, of course. Blue Origin's literally right across the street from the Kennedy Space Center visitor complex. And then there's, of course, other capabilities that are being worked through with those commercial partners like Northrop Grumman. Okay, so let me take all of that foundation that we just laid out and just do the side-by-side comparison of NASA versus the Space Force, right? So let's just make that super clear. NASA, civilian. Space Force, military. So NASA is civilian agency under the executive branch, while the Space Force is part of the Department of Defense. So Space Force Guardians that are in the uniform service wear the uniform just like every other branch of the military. There are civilians that are part of the civilian services of the Space Force, so that's absolutely an option for people that don't want to be in the uniform or can't be in the uniform for some reason. But yes, it is a military force, and their purposes, as I've kind of established, right, are different, where we have the exploration, observation, collecting of data, scientific purposes of NASA versus the security and defense purposes of the Space Force. Satellites that are looking down on Earth have specific sites of interest for national security reasons that they're looking at, right? So that's the side-by-side comparison. But what about the rest of Earth? We're supposed to defend the United States, but what about the rest of Earth? How many people have seen Don't Look Up? Okay, yeah. Movie is a hypothetical of if an asteroid's coming at Earth, what are we going to do about it, right? And there's a bunch of, private industry that's involved in the process with that. As of right now, the Planetary Defense Coordination Office that was established through NASA in 2016, they're in charge of whatever, outside threats may come from outside of our solar system. Now, where does the Space Force play into that? And I really had to do my homework on this one because it's not super clear cut as of right now. But in one of the NASA documents, it says that for data sharing and modeling efforts, that's where the Space Force, as of right now, plays a major role. And then if you go beyond that, well, okay, what about the actual mechanism of defending, of redirecting an asteroid? There was the double asteroid redirect test, the DART test that was done. It was successful. It was launched out of Vandenberg Air Force Base in California, one of the two launch facilities of the Space Force. So the Space Force helped out with that, but once it was off the ground, pretty much was NASA and a couple other partners, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, I believe, that was their main mission there. But who knows what the future holds, because one of the goals for the future that's mentioned in this document is developing technologies for near Earth object reconnaissance, deflection, and disruption missions. So basically looking at what are some other ways that we can go about redirecting one of these asteroids. Well, naturally, if some form of weapons or other capabilities that the Space Force has is involved, well, then probably the Space Force should get involved, right? That's the question on the table. That's the discussion going on. And that is what NASA is looking into to figure out how the Space Force could provide those capabilities in the future. So no, it's not a direct responsibility of the Space Force right now, but who knows in the future. And what about the aliens? What do I know? Lieutenant Vergara, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I don't know. But if I did, you probably wouldn't know the next day anyway. So that's just the nature of the military right there. So okay, that sums up the basics of what the Space Force is, and there is a lot of other more information online. I highly recommend going to these two websites. Spaceforce.com is more of the public outlooking website that kind of goes through the basics. Spaceforce.mil, anyone can access that, even though it's a military website, anyone can access that. It has some more in-depth publications and stuff like that. So if you want to dive a little deeper, then you would probably go there. And on spaceforce.mil, they have a little, image scroll through right when you load the website. And one of them is a quick link to this document, which is Space Force 101. And it is a very, very, I think maybe a month or two old, very recently published document going through the basics of what the Space Force is, which is very nice to have that for people like you sitting here wondering, just give me the basic rundown, right? So definitely take a look at that. If anyone walked in late, I'm just going to reiterate the disclaimer. Part part of why I'm on the uniform today. This is not officially endorsed by the Department of Defense, the Space Force, any agency, and the content I'm providing here is all open source. It's all for educational purposes. You can find much of this online and more. Big thanks to my parents who helped me with just going over the slides and making sure everything was good and kosher. And thank you, Mary, for really being gung-ho about the presentation today, and everyone else as part of AAI that has just come up to me and said, I'm really pumped for today and everything that's to be discovered about the Space Force. Just thank you for all the support and excitement around it. If you want to learn more, please feel free to contact me, and I'm going to be hanging out around after. Of course, we're going to take questions. But before we go to questions, we brought way too many cookies. So please come get some cookies before you leave. Please, 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 okay? The Cookie Monster floating out there, can't take them all. All right, so yeah.
You are welcome.
So do you have any idea where you're going to fit into those various responsibilities? You're going to be doing security, since that's sort of tangential to what you studied?
Yeah, that's a good question. She asked if I know what I'm going to be doing in the Space Force. I list a bunch of different focuses, so where do I fit in the picture? As of right now, I'm assigned to be a developmental engineer. That's one of a very small handful of career fields for officers in the Space Force. There's a much wider range of roles for enlisted that are doing a little bit more of the hands-on work. So I will be most likely, this is very much like just kind of guessing based on what I've been told so far, in some type of leadership position as I go through the ranks. So it might be part of larger teams. Developmental engineers in particular may be in charge of some type of technological system or technological capability and seeing its development, whether from start to finish, or I might be thrown right in the middle of it instead of finish it off or get started with one. I don't know. Yeah, I'll find out after I finish my year of training. Okay. Yes.
How important is Boeing to the Space Force?
I sense some concern in that question.
With good reason.
I'm not too familiar in the individual partnerships and like what each one is going to be doing in the next couple of years. Obviously, there's Boeing Starliner and everything with that, and our astronauts are going to get home safe.
Eventually.
Yeah. Yes. Eventually. In terms of the Space Force, I'm not too familiar. I imagine just like the others, they're probably writing up some designs for spacecraft that may be used for future space capabilities. I can't give you an official answer, that's for sure. But yes.
Two questions. How long do you sign up for? Do you do a 4-year turnaround or whatever? And how many persons are in the Space Force as of now?
Yes. All right. Two great questions. First, how many years am I required to serve? So I'm required 4 years of service, and then it's my choice to get out or continue, assuming I behave well. Second question, yes. How many personnel? I'm forgetting exactly how many thousand, but it's several thousand members of the Space Force that are in the uniform services, and I don't remember exactly how many if you count the civilian service. But they basically, when the Space Force was created, they took volunteers and they took people from the other branches of the military, from the Army, from even the Marines, the Navy, from the Air Force, of course. They took people from all the different branches and turned them into Guardians, took different insights and cultures from all the different branches as a foundation for the Space Force. So that's where that initial number came from. And then from there, they've been growing with, everyday Joes with their degrees that want to be an officer and do, or they want to enlist and they do whatever process to be a part of the military. So that's where that last bit of growth.
How did they get you to join?
How did they get me to join?
They
They gave me a cookie.
They gave you a cookie. Now, seriously, they must have known about you and they came to you, right?
Not quite. So No, I mean, I've been interested in space since I was little, like I, mentioned.
So many of us.
Yes, absolutely. So, the Space Force was created literally just a couple months after I joined ROTC when I started college as a freshman. So, when I started ROTC, I just assumed I was on the Air Force route because that's all that existed. And then once they figured out how to incorporate bringing in people from the different sources for officers, the Air Force Academy, Officer Training School, and then ROTC for all the civilian colleges, they gave a certain number of slots, and they said, we'll take people from all these colleges across the country and fill this number of slots. It was a relatively small number of slots, and it was pretty selective when I applied for it. So there was like an interview for it, just like any job application, honestly. So it was kind of like a supplemental process to what all my other peers were doing, just to be the normal Air Force route, where I kind of had to do a little bit of reading of what the Space Force culture and everything was supposed to be like, to show that I was really interested in it. That's how they did it. And now they're actually giving high school scholarships now for those that want to do ROTC and want to go into the Space Force. They're giving specific what they call Space Force Select high school scholarships, which is really cool. So they're starting to bring people in early that are really
So did you
interested.
apply for that when you're in high school? You applied for that, or when you're in college?
Yeah, so the scholarship program, that's a whole thing with ROTC. So the one I'm mentioning is one that you apply for in your senior year of high school.
Okay.
And then they say, well, do you want to do Air Force or Space Force? And they start you early on the track now. That's what's happening right now. What other questions we got?
I have one more.
Sure.
I actually am a little bit impressed, I must say, that the government actually did a pretty decent job of creating this and separating, because a lot of this stuff used to be under NASA, right? So there's usually a lot of infighting when that stuff's going on. I'm sure there's still some stuff where there's still defining lines, but it's actually nice to see that it's working out.
Yeah, no, it's definitely nice to see that the establishment of a brand new military branch isn't, there's not, from the outside perspective, right, a ton of friction that makes people, kind of question it, or there's a lot to be hopeful for, and to stand up a whole new military branch, to bring in people from all different backgrounds, and to get them on the same page is definitely a feat to undertake.
Yeah.
But so far it's seeming promising, and the training that I'm going to in Colorado Springs is exactly the kind of thing they need, I'm sure, because there are, like I mentioned, I will hopefully be a developmental engineer. They can change that technically, but if I'm on track to be a developmental engineer, that doesn't mean that I'm excused from not knowing the other space capabilities, because they're all just so intertwined. And if you think of the other military branches, there's some different jobs and roles that are just very far apart and not too related on a day-to-day basis. But all of the officer roles in the Space Force are all technical. Outside of that, just like the everyday functioning of a base, like a Space Force base, the Air Force are the ones that help us out with that. Literally things as simple as your security forces at the front gate, right? Or even your chefs. For those that don't know, that is a career in the Air Force. All those roles, those support roles, finance, everything, that's Air Force. So the Space Force is intended to be a very small, focused military branch towards all those technological capabilities. So the training I'm going to, as of my understanding right now, is to, regardless of my specific technical role, to be familiar in all the space capabilities and just be able to fit whatever need is there at the moment. Yes.
So how did the Space Command change in transition to becoming Space Force?
Yeah, so Space Command still exists, but Space Force is, it's its own military branch. There's a Space Command that basically takes all the leaders of the different military branches for them to cooperate, not just cooperate, for them to coordinate. In order to coordinate with the space capabilities that are provided by the Space Force. How that transition behind the scenes work, I don't really know too much. it's basically what I said about just taking members from the different branches and the Space Command that was under the Air Force still had, members of the other branches even before the creation of the Space Force, relying on those capabilities, and therefore they had people, operating with those capabilities and being familiar with them because, you have a ship out at sea or you have a soldier out in the field operating GPS, like just the everyday use of it has been critical to every single military member, regardless. Yeah. Yes.
Me again. Between us, we'll give you all the questions. If you're a high school student and you're thinking about Air Force ROTC,
Yeah.
which is available in colleges, but now they know about the Space Force,
Right.
do you go into Air Force ROTC with an interest in joining the Space Force, or do you go to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs and specify you want to be in the Space Force, or is everybody under the Air Force Academy?
Yeah.
Is everything under Air Force ROTC?
Great question. So basically, to be a part of either the Air Force or the Space Force, there's a couple of different routes to keep in mind. Thank you. So bottom line, you have to be a U.S. citizen. Just going to preface with that. I've mainly been talking about the officer route, which is the route I am going through right now. But there's enlisted. That's another option in which you just have to have a high school diploma or a GED. And at that point, you talk to a recruiter and they'll say, hey, here are your options with the Air Force or the Space Force. So for officers, you have to have at least a bachelor's degree. You can either have your bachelor's degree already done, already in the books, and you do officer training school, or you do ROTC, where you do your training for the Air Force or the Space Force concurrent with your studies at your school, or you do the Air Force Academy, which is a combination of both military and college, right? And same thing, towards the end of your journey, they start to figure out who's going to be Air Force or Space Force. And then there's the civilian route. The Air Force Civilian Service is the one that manages both Air Force and Space Force civilian service applications and the process for that. Hopefully that answers that. Yeah, sure. Great. All right.
Don't forget to ask people online.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Thank you, Mary. Okay. Zoom people, any questions?
Yes, I do have a question. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
You're
All
good.
right. So U.S. Space Force is responsible for tracking all the satellites?
Tracking all satellites? Is that your question?
Yes. In other words, to track all the international satellites?
Right. Yeah, so the Space Force, with all the satellites that we have up there, their part of their mission is absolutely to have eyes on everything that is in orbit, satellites or otherwise, even a bolt, something that could cause damage. They're tracking everything. That's part of the 47,000 plus number that I had up there, right? We don't have 47,000 plus satellites, but there's so many things that are orbiting around. So international satellites, yes, I mean, that's one of the interesting things about the space domain, right? That there isn't like on Earth where you have like a mountain that you can hide something or you can dig something into the ground and you can kind of, have obscured and hidden whatever military asset you want. Everything in space pretty much can be seen, right? I don't think we have invisible hologram things yet.
Yeah.
So everything in space that's up there and floating around, yeah, we can see it. So yes, tracking international satellites, tracking everything that we can.
But in the way of tracking, do we depend on other countries to cooperate with us on information? Is there information sharing requirements?
Yeah, I mean, so we have, our allies that have their own satellites as well. And I can't, it's all good. I can't personally speak to what they share, to how much extent. I'm sure that gets a little bit complicated. But I'm sure and I hope that there's plenty of stuff that they do share between each other that is in, each nation's best interest cooperatively.
But then we have the capability of still detecting satellites from nations that aren't as friendly.
Say that again?
We still have the capability ourselves of detecting those satellites that are from less friendly countries?
Like I said, everything can be seen up there. Now, when we see something and we say, "Whoa, we weren't tracking that before. Whose is that, or how did that get up there?" That's a different question, of course. And that's where you bring in to the conversation intelligence, right? Of what else do we know? When was the last launch from whatever nations that we're aware of, and just kind of like lining up all the information to get to the answer, to figure out whose is it, why is it up there? Those are all questions that we the Space Force tries to answer to the best of their ability with the information they have, and if it's in the interest of other nations, with whatever information they're willing to give us. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
Do any other nations have a corresponding division?
Of like Space Force.
Yeah.
So other countries have other space agencies, and now how militarized that is. I did a little research on that, and every country is very different how they've gone about it. We're very unique in having a dedicated military force that is, separate and operating from NASA, for example. There are countries that, almost everything is controlled by the government, so it's all kind of like mixed together how they go about those different responsibilities that I mentioned. For us, we kind of keep things in their lane per se, but every country's gone about it differently. So the Space Force is definitely unique on the global stage. It's unique. Yeah, good question. I like these questions. Yes.
With all the satellites and junk in space, do you categorize the threat level as a percentage?
That is above my pay grade, sir. But, I would definitely imagine, there's got to be threat categories, just like every branch has threat categories for the different types of threats that are on different physical domains. So land, sea, air, there's different threats to consider, and the same goes for space. What the categories are and how that exactly breaks out, I'm not too sure. I'm sure there is maybe some public information, but I'm sure there's also a lot that's not. So, I'll give it a Google the same as you after this. So. Okay, all right, awesome questions. Any final ones, or are we good? Okay,
Good job.
all right. You have a question?
No, it was just a clarification about the civilian service.
Sure.
You just for it because they ask questions, people
Sure.
in high school or college,
Yeah,
they don't have to join the forces
right.
like wear the green suit.
Yep.
They can join just as civilian engineers because they take a lot of engineers to support what they call the green suits.
Mm-hmm.
So anybody who's in college or whatever, I say I don't want to wear the green suit. Don't have to. They need a lot of engineers. And one more thing,
Yeah.
if you go to the website for civilian for the requirements, they have one part that says any community service that's related to space is a plus in their application,
Yeah.
which basically
So
these
become a member of the
organizations
AI is what I hear.
Couldn't hurt.
Okay.
Another one.
All right. Well, one last question.
What role would Space Force play in the event that someone detected that a spent Atlas rocket was on its way to crash into the space station? Space Force, Air Force?
Into the ISS, yeah. No, I mean, the Space Force would definitely be working with all,
And
space agencies from,
what might
countries
that
invested in
work-
ISS.
What might that work consist of?
say that again?
What might that work consist of? You have capability to blow up a rogue piece of space junk on its way to hitting a communication satellite?
That is a very good question. So I definitely don't have like a 1, 2, 3 answer to that, that's for sure. That's a very complicated space scenario that, there's all kinds of intelligence and physics and things that I
What's the likelihood of that happening in my lifetime?
happening in your lifetime.
Shoot,
I hope
Now
it
she has to
doesn't.
be an actuary too.
Yeah.
So one last question from my part.
Okay.
12 months from now after your training, are you gonna give us an update?
Mary's already asking all that.
Good job, Mary.
I said she could zoom in from Colorado on a Friday night.
Yeah.
Get her to give a presentation.
And if the stars align and I'm visiting New Jersey for some reason and I can pop by, that'd be even better. But yeah, I mean, Zoom is always a click away, right? So I'm definitely more than happy to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And stay safe, everyone. Have refreshments.
And if you want to come up and ask me, private questions, I'm happy to talk to.
And they brought refreshments and cookies and water and.
Let's get out of this first. Okay, let's wait until.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Get this open.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Good, how you doing?
I was considered a space man when I was
Yeah, I just got out of
Space Force.
postal surgery.
While I was in Air Everyone was calling me a space.
Now allowed to drive the car.
That's not fair.
I want to congratulate you.
Bug your own daughter?
Incredible
Sorry?
accomplishments.